So today we will talk about hypothesis testing. Till the last class we spoke about what is a research, types of research, and then we spoke about what are the steps in research, research design, and then now we talk about hypothesis. What is a hypothesis? And we'll see what topics we'll be covering in the class. We will see what is a hypothesis, what are the characteristics of a hypothesis, what are the sources of hypothesis, what are the types of hypothesis. We'll see some examples of an ideal hypothesis, and then we will see what are the functions or the role a hypothesis plays in a research. What are the steps in testing a hypothesis? Now, a hypothesis is a tentative statement, as I have already mentioned to you. It's a specific statement of a testable prediction which is expected to occur. This hypothesis can be true or false. The tentative statement can be true or false, and it is tested to verify how authentic is the assumption. An assumption about population parameter. This parameter should be estimated beforehand. So here we will be talking about technical terms like variables, population, and the relation between the variables and the population. Now we'll be talking about a research hypothesis, which means a research hypothesis is a research hypothesis that is used to test the relationship between two variables or more. So we will be using terminologies like population, variables, etc. And as we come across the terms, I will be telling you the meaning. What are the characteristics of hypothesis? A hypothesis should be a clear statement and precise so as to consider it to be reliable. I have to specify it. It has to be specific. It has to be clear, easy to understand so that it is reliable. It is stated in as short as possible. If the hypothesis is a relational hypothesis, then it should state the relationship between the variables. When we see about the types of hypothesis, we will be able to elaborate on what a relational hypothesis is. A hypothesis must be specific and should have scope for conducting more tests. The way of explaining a hypothesis must be simple. It should also be understood that simplicity of hypothesis is not related to its significance. But before we proceed, I'll just give you an example so that you understand what a hypothesis is. Now, considering the current situation, current scenario, we have said that in case the number of people affected with COVID does not come down or is increasing, the government will not lift the lockdown up. If that is what I'm saying, I'm going to say if the score of number of people affected by COVID goes on increasing at this rate, government will not lift the lockdown up and government will not start reopening any of these things that were shut. So now when I say about this, can I say it is very clear to you? It is testable, it is predictable, and it is reliable, right? It is a hypothetical statement that I am making, or it is a statement to be tested that I am making. Government will not lift the lockdown up if the trend is not going to fall of people affected with COVID. So now with this example, I hope you know the statement of hypothesis is clear. Now, what are the sources of hypothesis? Hypothesis talks about resemblance between phenomenons. Like, for example, earlier it has happened. So something like this is happening. Earlier, when the people affected with COVID, number of people affected with COVID was growing. So now the same thing may happen again. Right? Then observations from the past studies, present day experience, and from competitors. We can even take another example. Like, for example, I say, if you feed children with fatty food and if they don't go out to play, they may tend to become obese. They tend to become obese, right? So this is basically earlier something must have happened like this. Some child must have become obese because he was eating fatty food and he was not going out to play, no outdoor activities. Therefore, he must have become obese. Observations from past studies. People have already studied this and they are trying to relate it with present day experience. Other scientific theories like the body absorbs fat and the burning down of absorbed fat does not happen and therefore they become fat, right, and obese. General patterns that influence thinking process of people. Yes, it makes me think that he may become obese because he keeps watching TV, he keeps watching gadgets, he eats a lot of fatty food, he has no outdoor activities and hence he may become obese. Now there are actually 6 types of hypothesis. A simple hypothesis, complex hypothesis, a directional hypothesis, a non-directional hypothesis, null hypothesis, and associative and causal hypothesis. We will discuss these in detail in the coming slides. What is a dependent variable? What is an independent variable? We have already studied about regression, how to fit a regression equation, where we used to say y is equal to a plus bx. Do you remember this? Y is equal to a plus bx. If you remember this, where y was a variable in the sense it may take any value, right? It's where value keeps on varying. That is why we call y as variable. And then we say a is a constant, b is a constant, and b times x. So y is the dependent variable because y's value depends upon whatever value, whatever coefficient b is plus b times x, right? And x is the independent variable. Do you understand that? In case I say price of a good demanded depends only on, demand for a good depends only on price of the good, then I will say one dependent variable which is the demand and one independent variable which is the price. So therefore, this is a simple hypothesis. I say if price of a good X increases, only if its price falls, then only one dependent variable and one independent variable. Do you understand this? Y is the dependent variable because y is equal to X may take any value. It doesn't have anything to do with the value of y. That is what we say dependent and independent variable. The equation can also be like this because many a times I see students getting confused between dependent and independent variables and they say that variable which is on the left hand side is going to be dependent and the other one is independent. So I will say a plus b x is equal to y. Now in this case also y is the dependent variable, x is the independent variable. Super. and A and B are constants. Now, when I say this, simple hypothesis is a hypothesis which says only one a dependent variable and only one independent variable. Their relationship can be seen. Like for example, if you eat more vegetables, you will lose weight faster. Here, consumption of vegetables and weight loss. Weight loss is a dependent variable and consumption of vegetables is independent variable. Complex hypothesis. Complex hypothesis shows the relationship between two or more dependent variable and two or more independent variable. Like for example, I say eating more vegetables and fruits. Here I've added fruits and vegetables as independent variables. Result in weight loss and skin glowing and reduction of toxins, right, which cause diseases. So I'm going to say two independent variables, namely vegetables and fruits, you can consume any amount, but that will impact your weight, skin glow, reduction of risk like toxins, which may cause diseases, heart disease, blood pressure, and cancer. Now talking about directional hypothesis. A directional hypothesis shows how a researcher is intellectual and committed to the particular outcome. He has a particular outcome in mind. He needs only that outcome. So it is going to show the relationship between only those variables that are going to predict and their nature. For example, children aged 4 years eating proper food over 5-year period are having high IQ level than children not having a proper meal. Here he is trying to find out the effect and direction of the effect. Like for example, I'll give you another example. Like crop growth is influenced by lot of rainfall or the amount of rainfall, comma, amount of fertilizers used. Like for example, I say if more fertilizer is used and more rainfall is there, this crop will grow in a healthy pattern. So I am observing, I'm showing the direction. More of this, more of the crop growth, positive relationship along with the crop growth. Their variables and also dependent variable is crop growth. Independent variables are amount of fertilizers you feed and amount of rainfall. So more of this, more of this. There is a positive relationship. If one increases, if the two of these increase, the other also increases or the outcome also increases. Talking about the non-directional hypothesis. When I say non-directional hypothesis, non-directional hypothesis is used when there is no theory actually involved. It is a statement that a relationship exists between two variables without predicting their nature or direction of the relationship. Like for example, I say non-directional hypothesis says that crop growth is influenced by the amount of rainfall and fertilizer feed. So amount of fertilizer feed. I did not say more the rainfall, more amount of rainfall, more crop growth. I only said rainfall. Say some crops are such that they don't need more water. Like cactus. Cactus does not need water at all. So lesser the rainfall, more is the growth of that plant. So we are going to say there is a relationship, it exists, but I don't know the exact direction of the relationship, positive or negative. Like for example, oily foods have an influence over your weight. Then more oily foods, weight increases. But I do not say the relationship. So I'm going to say oily foods influence your weight, influence your your disease developing capacity. More oily food, you may develop more diseases. Null hypothesis, a statement that is contrary to the belief that I have. It is actually a negative statement. It says that there is no relationship between consuming Complan and growth of height of children. So which means this is a null hypothesis. It is a tentative statement. I'm going to test it, verify it. Yes, children consuming Complan does not have this Complan consumption does not depend on their growth of height, increase in height or increase in height. Therefore, I say that there is no relationship between the two variables, and therefore it is denoted by H naught. I have not mentioned alternate hypothesis, but we'll talk about it. Alternate hypothesis is opposite of null hypothesis. It states that if the children consume Complan, there is a relationship between children consuming Complan and their increase in height. This is an alternate hypothesis. It is opposite of your null hypothesis. Whatever the researcher wants to prove, it can be proved or disproved with the help of null and hypothesis, proving and disproving. Associative and causal hypothesis. Here I say associative hypothesis is when there is a change in one variable resulting in change in the other, which means one variable is influencing the other variable. Causal hypothesis is going to be cause and effect relationship. Rainfall and crop growth. Rainfall influences crop growth. Crop growth is the dependent variable and rainfall is the independent variable. Now I've quoted some examples also of hypothesis and their types. Consumption of sugary drinks every day leads to obesity is an example of simple hypothesis. One dependent variable, one independent variable. All lilies have same number of petals. It's an example of null hypothesis. I will re-quote it. Number of petals does not have any relationship with the number of petals. Lilies and number of petals do not have any relationship between them. This is an example of null hypothesis. If a person gets 7 hours of sleep, then he will feel less fatigue than if he sleeps less. This is going to be causal hypothesis because I'm going to say if the number of hours of sleep increases, it has an impact on the fatigue amount. Now let's see the functions of hypothesis. So till now we were saying what is the meaning of a hypothesis, what are the characteristics of hypothesis, what are the types of hypothesis, what are the sources of hypothesis. Now we will talk about functions of a hypothesis or the role of hypothesis in a research. Considering hypothesis plays a very vital role when you conduct a research. Let us see the functions. Hypothesis helps me in making an observation and experiments possible. Now it is giving me a focus here. Like for example, when I frame a hypothesis, I say that oily food has no relationship to the health of an individual. So I start making observations on the intake of oily food per day and I monitor the health of the person in terms of his health, in terms of his weight, in terms of his diseases that he may tend to develop, etc. Right? And it becomes a start point of any investigation. Yes, once I have framed this, I start working on the observation part. It also helps me in verifying the observations that I feel I need to make. and it is helping me in giving a direction. I'm able to proceed in terms. Depending on the intake of oily food, I am trying to proceed with my inquiry or in-depth investigation. Now, scientific method, a researcher is using hypothesis to put down his thought in directing how experiment would take place. And these are the steps. He forms question. What are the impacts of oily food in a person's body? And what is the background of the research? And he creates a hypothesis saying oily food has a significant impact in the health of a person. So he starts collecting data. He collects data on people's intake of oil on a daily basis. What is the amount of oil that they take? Maybe in milliliters, maybe in liters per month, etc. And then he's going to analyze these results, collected data. He's going to summarize the experiment and communicate the results to you. More oil intake, or if a person consumes less than a liter of oil, he does not tend to gain more than 2 kgs of weight or more than half a kg of weight per month. Now let's see how a hypothesis can be tested. Steps in testing a hypothesis. Now when I say steps in testing a hypothesis, what are the steps in testing a hypothesis? I state a hypothesis. I start with my null hypothesis. I say there is no relationship between the variables oil intake and health of a person, weight of a person. And I select a probability error level, which means it may hold good for 95% of the population. I say 95% significance level or confidence interval. Like for example, 5% significance level and 95% confidence level. I say 95% of the time the null hypothesis holds good. Like oil intake does not impact the weight gain of a person. So I'm going to say it is going to hold good here for 95% of the time. Anything lesser than that, I'm going to reject the null hypothesis. We always say 95% मैं sure हूँ कि ये होने ही वाला है. The same way, say I'm going to say 99%, 95% or 96%, whatever I feel should be the confidence interval. I'm confident 95% it is going to hold good, right? Probability error level is at 5% level. And then I start conducting a correlation test and then finding out what is the significance level. Or I'm going to, and now I'm going to interpret. These are statistical tests. Correlation is a basic level test. There are various other tests. When we are going to conduct a statistical test, when we discuss about them, I will discuss this. We are going to interpret the result based on my findings. I have a tabular value. I compare that with my actual value that I have calculated, and then I'm going to say, I'm going to reject the null hypothesis or accept the null hypothesis. I state a hypothesis and then I'm going to decide on my null hypothesis. I'm going to decide on my probability of error level. 5% it may hold good or not. I'm not bothered. If I say 95% it is standing good. And I'm going to compute based on the test, whatever observations I have got. And I'm going to reject or accept. We will continue in the next meeting. I'm stopping the meeting here. I'm continuing in the next meeting.